I'm Zoe, I'm 28 female, and at my annual family reunion, I shattered my family's most cherished illusion, that I was a failure. The truth, as they discovered when I held up my phone and canceled their lease renewal, was that the daughter they belittled was the very person keeping a roof over their heads. The scent of grilled hot dogs and freshly cut grass is supposed to be nostalgic. For me, it was the smell of impending doom. Every third Saturday in July, my extended family gathered at my Aunt Carol's sprawling, perfectly manicured backyard for the Henderson family reunion. It was a day of forced smiles, lukewarm potato salad, and a thick, cloying atmosphere of judgment that clung to me like humidity. For 28 years, I had played a specific role in this family theater: the quiet, awkward, perpetually disappointing older child, the underachiever, the one who just couldn't seem to get her life together. My Uncle Rick, a man whose voice was perpetually stuck on a setting just below a foghorn, was the director of this recurring play. He clapped me on the shoulder, his grip a little too tight, his breath smelling of beer and self-satisfaction. "Zoe Bug, still hiding behind that computer screen all day. You gotta get out in the real world, get your hands dirty. Look at your brother, now there's a kid with a future." I gave him the same thin, non-committal smile I'd been practicing since I was a teenager. "It's good to see you too, Uncle Rick." He wasn't wrong about my brother Alex. At 26, Alex was the family's crown jewel, the golden child. He was an elementary school teacher, a profession my family understood and, more importantly, respected. It was noble. It was stable. It came with a pension and summers off. He had a modest apartment, a sensible sedan, and a long-term girlfriend who was also a teacher. He was, in my parents' eyes, the epitome of success. I, on the other hand, was an enigma they'd long given up on trying to solve. I was an app developer. When I tried to explain what I did, their eyes would glaze over. To them, working from home was a euphemism for unemployed and living in pajamas. They couldn't see an office, a boss, or a daily commute, so in their minds, my career didn't exist. It was a hobby, a phase, a childish fantasy I refused to let go of. The fact that I lived alone in a nice apartment in the city was a mystery they explained away with a narrative of their own invention. I was either burning through some small inheritance from a great-aunt, or more likely, my parents were secretly funding my lifestyle. My mother, Diane, was the primary author of this narrative. She moved through the party with a queen's air, accepting compliments on her son's latest achievements. When she looked at me, her smile tightened, and a familiar look of weary resignation settled in her eyes. It was a look that said, "What am I going to do with you?" This dynamic wasn't new. It was a story written in 1,000 tiny moments over decades. I remember in high school when Alex was the star quarterback. His games were mandatory family events. My father, Mark, who was usually a quiet and passive man, would come alive in the stands, shouting until he was hoarse. My mother would organize pre-game tailgate parties. When I won first place in a statewide coding competition my senior year, a competition that came with a significant college scholarship, I came home beaming, holding a trophy. My father glanced at it and said, "Oh, that's nice, honey." My mother's only question was, "Is that like video games? Don't forget, Alex's playoff game is on Friday. I need you to make your 7-layer dip." The trophy ended up in a box in my closet, while Alex's football awards filled an entire glass cabinet in the living room. The disparity only grew when we got older. When Alex graduated with his teaching degree, my parents threw him a massive party. They gifted him a brand new, reliable sedan to get him started on the right foot. The entire family chipped in, and the pride in the room was palpable. 2 years earlier, when I had graduated with a degree in computer science, a field I was deeply passionate about, the celebration consisted of a dinner at a mid-range chain restaurant. My gift was a card from my mother with a crisp $20 bill inside and a note that read, "Hopefully, this helps you find a real job soon." It was the constant, casual dismissal that hurt the most. On our weekly phone calls, my mother would spend 30 minutes providing a detailed, enthusiastic report on Alex's life. She knew the names of his students, the theme of his classroom bulletin board, and the drama with the school's difficult principal. When the monologue about Alex finally concluded and she'd ask, "So, what's new with you?" It was with an air of pure obligation. The one time I tried to explain a complex project I was leading, one that was both challenging and incredibly rewarding, she cut me off mid-sentence. "Oh, that. S nice dear," she'd said, her voice distant. "Listen, I have to go, your father just put the lasagna in the oven." Click. The message was always the same. Alex's life was real and important. Mine was a confusing, irrelevant hobby. They loved me, I suppose, in the way you love a piece of furniture that's always been there. You'd notice if it was gone, but you never really stopped to appreciate it. So I stood there in the July heat, a plastic cup of lemonade sweating in my hand, watching the family fate my brother. He was holding court by the grill, retelling a funny story about a kindergartner, and my parents were looking at him with such unfiltered adoration, it was almost painful to watch. I had long ago stopped trying to win their approval. I had realized it was a game I was never meant to win. Instead, I had built a life for myself, a successful one, entirely outside their field of vision. And for 3 years, I had been holding a secret so immense, so reality-shattering, that I almost buckled under its weight. They thought I couldn't survive without them. The irony was, they had it completely backward. The secret began with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday in October, 3 years ago. I was in the zone, deep into the final debugging phase of my first major application, an organizational tool I had poured 2 years of my life into. The code was a beautiful, complex tapestry on my screen, and I was on the verge of a breakthrough. Then my phone buzzed, flashing "Mom" in stark white letters. My first instinct was to ignore it. Our calls were so often draining, circular conversations that left me feeling small and misunderstood. But a second call came immediately after, followed by a text from my dad. "Call your mother. It's an emergency." A cold dread washed over me. I picked up, my heart pounding. "Mom, what's wrong?" Her voice was thin and shaky, stripped of its usual commanding tone. "Zoe, it's Mr. Henderson, our landlord." My parents had rented the same small, blue-shuttered house for over 30 years. It was the only home I'd ever known. "He's selling the house. He sold it. The new owners want to move in. We have 60 days to get out." I could hear my father in the background, his voice a low, defeated murmur. For the first time in my life, I heard genuine panic in my mother's voice. "Everything is so expensive now, Zoe. We've looked. We can't afford anything in this town. We have our savings, but it's not enough. After 30 years, we're going to be homeless." The word homeless hung in the air between us, stark and terrifying. My parents weren't destitute, but they lived paycheck to paycheck. My father's job at the local hardware store was steady but not lucrative, and my mother worked part-time as a receptionist. They had some retirement savings, but not nearly enough to handle the sky-high rental market or a down payment on a new home. They were good people who had worked hard but had been caught in the crosscurrents of a changing economy. I felt a surge of empathy so strong it made my chest ache. These were the people who dismissed my life's work, who favored my brother, who made me feel like a perpetual disappointment. But they were also my parents. The woman on the phone was the one who made me soup when I was sick, and the man in the background was the one who taught me how to ride a bike. Their panic was my panic. "Okay, Mom, just breathe," I said, my own mind racing. "Don't do anything yet, let me think, let me see what I can do." "What can you do, Zoe?" she asked, and the familiar edge of dismissal crept back into her voice, even in her desperation. "It's not like you can just buy us a house." She meant it as a statement of fact, a sad reality. She had no idea how wrong she was. 2 weeks earlier, I had finalized the sale of my organizational app to a major tech firm in Silicon Valley. The negotiations had been a whirlwind, conducted through video calls from my small apartment. The final number was staggering. It was a life-altering amount of money, the kind that shows up in your bank account with so many zeros you have to count them twice to be sure. I hadn't told anyone, not a soul. How could I? If I told my parents I was suddenly a millionaire, they wouldn't believe me. They'd think it was some kind of scam or a lie I was telling for attention. Their entire perception of me was built on the foundation of my failure. To tell them I was now, by any conceivable metric, wildly successful would have broken their brains. And a part of me, a bitter, resentful part, didn't want to give them the satisfaction. But hearing the raw fear in my mother's voice changed everything. The problem wasn't just money, it was their home. It was the place where my height was marked in pencil on a doorframe, the backyard where I first learned to catch a firefly. The idea of them being forced out, humiliated and scared, was unbearable. An idea began to form, a wild and audacious plan. And my mother's sarcastic words echoed in my head. It's not like you can just buy us a house. But what if I could? The next day, I contacted a financial advisor and a lawyer. I explained the situation, leaving out the personal family dynamics. I wanted to create a limited liability company, an LLC. I wanted it to be anonymous, a shield to hide behind. We settled on the most generic name we could think of, Ridgeway Property Group, LLC. It sounded stable, boring, and utterly impersonal. Through the LLC, with my lawyer acting as the public face, I made an offer on my parents' house. The new owners who had planned to move in were actually a development company that had bought the property cheaply from the elderly Mr. Henderson. They were planning to tear it down. My all-cash offer, which was significantly above what they had paid, was an easy decision for them. Within 2 weeks, the deal was closed. Ridgeway Property Group, LLC, which was, for all intents and purposes, just me, owned my childhood home. The next step was the most delicate. My lawyer drafted a letter from the new property management company to my parents. It informed them that the new owner was an investment group that had no intention of occupying the property and was pleased to offer them a new 1-year lease. The masterstroke, and the part that both pained and protected me, was the rent. The market rate for a house that size in their neighborhood was easily over $3,000 a month. They had been paying Mr. Henderson a legacy rate of $1,500. I set their new rent at $1,600. It was just enough of an increase to be believable, to make them grumble about the new corporate owners, but it was still a massive, unspoken subsidy. Every month, they would be saving nearly half of what they should have been paying. It was a secret gift, a safety net they would never see. I set up a completely automated online portal for all communication. They would pay their rent through the portal. They would submit maintenance requests through the portal. They would never speak to a person. They would never know their landlord, the dispassionate investor saving them from financial ruin, was the daughter they thought couldn't hold down a real job. When my mom called to tell me the good news, her relief was palpable. "Can you believe our luck, Zoe? Some faceless company bought the house and they're letting us stay. The rent is up a little, which is a pain, but we can manage. We're saved." I murmured my congratulations, my heart a complicated knot of emotions. There was relief, of course, but also a profound sense of loneliness. I had solved their biggest problem, secured their future, and I had to pretend I had nothing to do with it. I was their protector, and my superpower was their complete and utter underestimation of me. For 3 years, I maintained this charade. I listened to my mother complain about the impersonal online portal. I listened to my father grumble about the corporate landlord. And all the while, I would approve the plumber for the leaky faucet or renew the insurance on the property, my secret and invisible wall between us. The money they paid in rent flowed from their bank account into the LLCs, and then, after covering the property's expenses, a significant portion flowed right back to them in the form of their subsidized living. They were, in a way, living off me, the exact opposite of the narrative they so proudly shared with the world. The family reunion was in full swing. Children shrieked as they ran through sprinklers, and the air was thick with the haze from the grill where Uncle Rick, self-appointed king of the barbecue, was holding a spatula like a royal scepter. I found a quiet spot on the edge of the deck, nursing my lemonade, trying to become one with the potted ferns. It was a survival strategy I had perfected over the years. Stay quiet, stay on the periphery, and count the minutes until I could make a polite exit. My brother Alex was the sun around which the family planets orbited. He had just finished explaining, with great comedic timing, a story about a parent-teacher conference gone wrong. My aunts and uncles roared with laughter. My mother, Diane, beamed, her eyes sparkling with pride. "Oh, Alex, you're just a natural," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We are so proud of the man you've become." My father, Mark, stood beside her, nodding in agreement. He caught my eye for a brief second and gave me a small, almost apologetic smile before turning his attention back to his celebrated son. That little smile was the most acknowledgement I'd received all day. I felt the familiar sting, the dull ache of being perpetually on the outside looking in. It wasn't jealousy of Alex, not really. I was happy for him. His life was his own, and he was good at it. The pain came from the comparison, the unspoken but deafeningly loud message that his life was valid and mine was not. As the afternoon wore on, the heat and the cheap beer made the adults louder and more sentimental. It was Uncle Rick who decided it was time for his annual, impromptu, State of the Family address. He clinked a bottle against the deck railing to get everyone's attention. "All right, everyone, settle down," he boomed. People quieted, turning toward him with expectant smiles. This was a beloved tradition for them and my personal nightmare. Another year, another great reunion. It does my heart good to see all of us together, to see the next generation growing up making their own way. His eyes scanned the crowd, and then, like a heat-seeking missile, they locked onto me. A slow, mischievous grin spread across his face. "We've got Alex here," he gestured dramatically toward my brother, "molding young minds. A real pillar of the community. We're all proud of you, son." A smattering of applause broke out. Alex blushed, looking pleased. Then Uncle Rick turned his full attention to me. The grin on his face became a taunting smirk. "And then we've got Zoe," he announced, his voice dripping with condescending affection. The crowd turned to look at me, and I felt 100 pairs of eyes pin me to my spot. I just wanted to dissolve into the deck boards. He took a long swig of his beer, playing the moment for all it was worth. "So Zoe," he laughed, a loud, grating sound, "you still living off your parents?" The question hung in the humid air. It wasn't a genuine inquiry, it was a punchline. It was the confirmation of the family's favorite story about me. A wave of laughter rippled through the adults. It wasn't cruel, not exactly. It was the easy, familiar laughter of people enjoying a shared joke they'd been telling for years. They were laughing with Uncle Rick, but they were laughing at me. I looked for an ally, a friendly face. My father was intently studying the contents of his cup. My aunts and cousins were all smiling, and then I looked at my mother. She wasn't laughing, but what she did was so much worse. She caught my eye, and a small, knowing smirk played on her lips. It was a look of shared conspiracy with Rick, with the whole family. A look that said, "He's right, you know, we all know it." Then she added her own verse to the song of my failure. "Well, Rick," she said, her voice light and teasing, but the words were like stones. She could never make it on her own, we all know that. And that was it, that was the moment. It wasn't Uncle Rick's clumsy, oafish joke. I was used to that. It was my own mother. My mother who had cried on the phone to me in terror. My mother, whose home I had secretly saved. My mother who was living a comfortable, subsidized life because of the very daughter she was now publicly shaming. Her words, delivered with that casual, cutting smirk, severed the last thread of filial obligation in my heart. For years, I had absorbed their judgment, their disappointment, their complete misunderstanding of my life. I had swallowed my pride, buried my successes, and maintained a secret that protected them. And for what? So they could use me as a punchline at a party, so my own mother could get a cheap laugh at my expense. A strange thing happened. The hot flush of humiliation that had been creeping up my neck instantly vanished, replaced by an arctic calm. The background noise of the party, the laughter, the music, the kids yelling faded into a distant buzz. Everything came into sharp, crystalline focus. In that moment, the weight of the secret I had been carrying for 3 years transformed. It was no longer a burden to be borne, it was a weapon to be wielded. I didn't say anything, I didn't defend myself, I just smiled. It wasn't the thin, watery smile they were used to, this one was different. It was cool, confident, and held a hint of something they had never seen from me before. I held my mother's gaze, letting the silence stretch. I watched her smirk begin to falter, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. She had expected me to shrink, to look away, to mumble a denial. She didn't know what to do with this new, smiling version of me. The time for hiding was over. The game had changed, and I was about to make the winning move. The laughter around me began to die down, sputtering out into awkward titters as I continued to smile without saying a word. The silence stretched, becoming taut and uncomfortable. All eyes were on me, waiting for the crumble, the flustered denial, the usual retreat. It never came. I let my gaze drift from my mother's now confused face to my Uncle Rick's smug one, and then I slowly panned across the crowd of relatives who had been so quick to laugh. I let them see the smile. I let them wonder. Then, very deliberately, I reached into the pocket of my jeans and pulled out my phone. It felt cool and solid in my hand, a piece of the world where I was competent and in control. I spoke and my voice was unnervingly steady. It cut through the queue. Uyet backyard with the precision of a scalpel. Funny, I said, my smile unwavering. That's a funny thing to say. I looked directly at my mother and father. Funny, their lease renewal depends on me. A collective, confused silence fell over the party. You could have heard a plastic fork drop onto the grass. My words made no sense to them. It was a non sequitur, a line from a play they didn't have the script for. Uncle Rick let out a confused bark of a laugh. What in the world are you talking about, Zoe? Did you have too much lemonade? No, I said, my eyes still locked on my parents. My father, Mark, just looked bewildered, his brow furrowed. My mother, Diane, had a flicker of irritation on her face, as if I were ruining a perfectly good party with my nonsense. Let me clarify, I said, my voice remaining level and calm. I unlocked my phone, my thumb swiping across the screen with practiced ease. I navigated to a specific app, one with a simple, corporate-looking logo. The home screen loaded, displaying the name in clean, sans-serif font, Ridgeway Property Group. I held the phone up, angling the screen so that my parents, and anyone standing near them, could see it. 3 years ago, I began, narrating the story to the assembled crowd as if I were giving a business presentation. After Mr. Henderson sold your house, and you were given 60 days' notice, a new company bought the property. That company was called Ridgeway Property Group, LLC. My father's eyes widened slightly. He recognized the name from the lease he signed every year. My mother was still looking at me with a stony expression, but a seed of unease was visibly planted. That company offered you a new lease, I continued, my voice gaining strength. A lease for $1,600 a month in a neighborhood where the going rate for a comparable house is over $3,000. For 3 years, that company has been your landlord. That company has been subsidizing your life to the tune of almost $15,000 a year. I let that sink in. I could see the mental calculations starting to happen on the faces of my more financially savvy relatives. My mother's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I know this, I said, my smile finally fading into a neutral, businesslike expression, because I am Ridgeway Property Group. I tilted the phone screen again, my finger tapping on the account details section of the portal. There, under Principal Officer, was my name, Zoe M. Henderson, and right below it, under Managed Properties, was their address, their home. The silence that followed was nothing like the one before. This was a profound, deafening, vacuum-sealed silence. It was the sound of an entire family's shared reality collapsing in on itself. My Uncle Rick's jaw was literally hanging open. His face, usually ruddy with good cheer and beer, had gone pale. All the aunts and cousins who had been laughing just moments before now wore identical masks of slack-jawed disbelief. But I only had eyes for my parents. My father looked like he had been struck by lightning. He stared at the phone, then at my face, then back at the phone. His mind was struggling to connect two completely incompatible ideas: Zoe, his disappointing daughter, and this anonymous, powerful entity that owned his home. My mother's reaction was the most dramatic. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin looking like old parchment. Her smirk was a distant memory, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. Her eyes, which had always looked at me with dismissal, now saw me for the first time. And in them I saw it all: the confusion, the dawning horror, and finally, the terrifying realization of what she had just done. She had stood before her family and mocked her benefactor. She had belittled the very person who held the key to her home. "Your lease is set to auto-renew in 2 days," I said, my voice dropping to an almost whisper, yet it carried across the yard with perfect clarity. I navigated back to the main dashboard on the portal, where a large, green button was clearly visible. It read, "Cancel auto-renewal." I held the phone up high for all to see. I looked at my mother, at her trembling lip and her wide, terrified eyes. I looked at my father, who seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement that felt like it was happening outside of time, I moved my thumb over the screen. The room went silent, right before I hit cancel. The button on the screen turned from green to a stark, final red. A confirmation message appeared: "Auto-renewal has been cancelled. The lease will expire on its end date." I lowered the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. "The party's over," I said to no one in particular, and turning my back on the tableau of my stunned, silent family, I walked away. I didn't run, I walked. My steps were even and measured as I crossed the lawn, went through T. He sighed gate and let it click shut behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes on my back, could feel the shockwaves emanating from the deck. The silence held until I was halfway to my car parked down the street. Then a low murmur began, like the buzzing of a disturbed hornet's nest. I could just make out a single, sharp cry of my name, Zoe, in my mother's voice, but I didn't stop. I got into my car and closed the door, shutting out the sounds of the neighborhood. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild drumbeat in the sudden quiet. The adrenaline that had turned my veins to ice was now coursing through me like fire. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer, earth-shattering release of it all. I had done it. After years of biting my tongue, of absorbing their condescension, of hiding my life and my success, I had finally, irrevocably, pulled back the curtain. There was no going back. The family's comfortable, long-running narrative about me had been detonated. I had left them standing in the crater. The drive home was a blur. The familiar streets of my hometown looked alien, like a set from a movie I was no longer a part of. When I walked into my apartment, the contrast was jarring. This was my space, a place I had built and furnished with the fruits of my own labor. The sleek, minimalist furniture, the powerful computer rig in my office, the floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city skyline, it was all real. It was everything they claimed I didn't have. Here, I wasn't Zoe Bug, the family failure. I was Zoe Henderson, owner of a successful company, and, as of an hour ago, the executioner of my family's delusions. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound and hollow exhaustion. With it came the grief, because even in my victory there was loss. I had wanted respect, not fear. I had wanted them to see me, not to be terrified of me. By asserting my power, I had also cemented the gulf between us. I sank onto my couch, the silence of my apartment amplifying the turmoil in my head. My phone, which I had placed on the coffee table, remained silent for 2 hours. I knew a storm was raging back at the reunion. Frantic explanations, accusations, denials. My father trying to process. My mother trying to save face. My uncle trying to understand how the meek little niece he loved to tease had just seized control of the entire family dynamic. Then the phone buzzed. It was my brother, Alex. I stared at his name, my thumb hovering over the accept button. I was torn. Alex had always been on the periphery of the conflict, a passive beneficiary of the system rather than an active participant. He had never been cruel to me, but he had never defended me either. I decided to answer. "Zoe," his voice was hesitant, uncertain. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Alex," I said, my voice flat. What was that? Is it true, all of it?" Yes, I said, it's all true. He was silent for a moment. I could hear muffled voices in the background, my mother sounding hysterical. They're freaking out, Zoe, Mom is. She's a mess. Dad just keeps sitting there not saying anything. Uncle Rick left without saying goodbye. You blew everything up. Did I, Alex? I asked, a new coldness creeping into my tone. Or did I just finally show everyone the truth? Were you laughing too when Uncle Rick made his joke? No, I mean, it wasn't funny, but it's just Uncle Rick. He's always been like that. And Mom, I pressed. She could never make it on her own. Did you think that was just Mom being Mom? He didn't have an answer. That was the answer. Look, I have to go, he said, his voice strained. Mom wants to. They're going to come over to your place. No, I said, the single word a steel door slamming shut. You tell them not to come here. I won't see them tonight. Zoe, you can't just. I can, I interrupted. And I am. This conversation is over, Alex. I hung up before he could reply and immediately put my phone on silent. I wasn't ready for the confrontation. Not yet. I needed the dust to settle, not just for them, but for me. The rest of the night passed in a strange, suspended state. I ordered takeout I barely touched and watched a movie I couldn't follow. I was a stranger to myself, a person who had just done the unthinkable. The quiet satisfaction of my final move was now warring with the deep, primal sorrow of having to do it at all. I had proven I didn't need their approval. But as I sat alone in my beautiful apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my success, I was forced to admit a painful truth. I had never stopped wanting it. 2 days passed in complete silence. My phone remained a dark, quiet rectangle on my counter. No calls, no texts. I knew it wasn't peace. It was the eerie calm before the storm. They were regrouping, SDR. HIzing. Or maybe they were simply paralyzed, unsure how to approach the daughter they no longer recognized. I spent the time working, finding a strange comfort in the cool logic of code, a world where problems had solutions and things made sense. On the third day, the doorman buzzed up. Ms. Henderson, Mark and Diane Henderson are here to see you. They say it's urgent. My heart gave a heavy thud. The time had come. Send them up, I said, my voice betraying none of my inner turmoil. I stood by the door, my arms crossed, waiting. When they stepped out of the elevator, I was struck by how different they looked. Stripped of the familiar backdrop of their home or a family gathering, they seemed smaller, older, and deeply out of place in the sleek, modern hallway of my building. My father, Mark, looked utterly broken. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he clutched a worn baseball cap in his hands, twisting the brim endlessly. My mother, Diane, was a different story. Her face was a mask of strained composure, but her eyes darted around, taking in the expensive finishes of the building with a mixture of awe and resentment. She was trying to project anger, to hold on to her role as the aggrieved matriarch, but fear radiated from her in palpable waves. I let them into my apartment without a word, closing the door behind them. They shuffled into the living area, stopping in the center of the room like defendants in a courtroom. The sprawling view of the city from my windows seemed to mock the smallness of their world. My father spoke first, his voice raspy. Zoe, he trailed off, shaking his head as if he couldn't find the words. My mother found them for him. How could you, Zoe? She began, her voice trembling with a forced indignation. How could you humiliate us like that, in front of everyone, in front of our family? I met her gaze without flinching. Humiliate you, I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. Let's talk about humiliation, Mom. Let's talk about standing in a crowd of 30 people and listening to my own mother tell them I'm a failure who can't make it on her own. Was that not humiliating? That was just, it was a joke, it was Rick, she retorted, her hands fluttering nervously. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. Rick was the opening act. You were the headliner. You're the one who was supposed to defend me, or, at the very least, stay silent. But you couldn't, could you? You had to get your little jab in. You had to reinforce the story. What story? She demanded, her voice rising. The story that we love you and have supported you. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Supported me? You call that support? For my entire life, you have treated my ambitions as a joke and Alex's as gospel. You threw him a party and bought him a car for his degree. I got $20 in a card. You listened to him talk about his job for hours, but you cut me off to talk about lasagna. Is that your definition of support? I started pacing, the years of suppressed frustration pouring out of me. I kept this secret for 3 years. 3 years, do you have any idea what that was like? To listen to you panic about losing your home and not be able to tell you it was okay, that I had already taken care of it. To listen to you complain about your corporate landlord knowing it was me. I did it to protect you. Not just your finances, but your pride. I knew you couldn't handle the truth. I knew you couldn't accept that the daughter you'd written off, as a lost cause, was the one holding the safety net. My father finally looked up, his eyes filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. You bought the house for us, he whispered. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said, stopping to face him. And what did I get in return? Mockery, pity, the constant, unending narrative that I was a child playing at a fake job while living off of your charity. The irony is staggering, don't you think? My mother sank onto the edge of my pristine white couch, her fight finally draining away, leaving only a hollow shell. We didn't know, Zoe, she whispered. That's the entire point, I exclaimed, my voice finally cracking with the emotion I had held back for so long. You didn't know because you never bothered to ask. You never took me seriously enough to even consider that I could be successful. You built a version of me in your heads, Zoe the dreamer, Zoe the slacker, and you never let any evidence to the contrary get in the way. It was easier for you to believe I was failing than to admit that my path, a path you didn't understand, could actually lead somewhere. Tears were now streaming down my father's face. We're so sorry, Zoe, he choked out. I am so sorry. I was a coward. I saw it happening and I never said anything. I just let it happen. I am so sorry. I looked at him, at his genuine remorse, and felt a flicker of the old affection. Then I looked at my mother. She was crying silently, her face buried in her hands. Her sobs were not the theatrical cries of a victim, but the quiet, wrenching sobs of someone whose world had been turned upside down. She was finally mourning the relationship she had broken. I don't want your apologies right now, I said, my voice softening slightly. Apologies are just words. I've had a lifetime of words from you. What I need is for you to understand. Not just to understand that I have money, but to understand the damage you've done. The years of feeling invisible in my own family. I took a deep breath, gathering my resolve. This isn't about the house anymore. It's not about the rent or the lease. That's just a symptom of the real problem. I canceled the renewal to get your attention. Well, now I have it. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. You need to leave now, I said, my back to them. I'm not going to make you homeless. That was never the point. But we have nothing more to discuss until you have both really thought about everything I've said. The next time we talk, it will be on my terms, and it will be about respect. Until you can figure out how to give me that, there is no new lease. I heard them get up. My father hesitated behind me for a moment, and I heard him take a ragged breath before he turned and guided my mother, who was still weeping, out of my apartment. The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone once more in the silence. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the promise of a new beginning, one that would be built on a foundation of truth, however painful it was to lay. A week went by. It was the strangest week of my life, a period of profound quiet after a seismic event. I expected frantic calls from Alex or my aunts, but there were none. It seemed my display at the reunion, followed by the confrontation at my apartment, had sent a clear message to the entire family. The rules of engagement had changed, and Zoe was no longer the designated target. Then on the 8th day, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. It had no return address, but I recognized my mother's elegant, looping handwriting immediately. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a letter, several pages long. It wasn't an email or a text. It was a handwritten letter, an artifact from a time when people took care with their words. I sat down and began to read. My dearest Zoe, the letter began. I don't know where to start, and sorry feels like the smallest word in the world right now. What followed was not an excuse or a justification. It was a confession. She wrote about her own fears, her own rigid ideas about what a successful life looked like, ideas that had been passed down from her parents. She admitted that she and my father had been terrified when I chose a career path they couldn't comprehend. It was easier, she wrote, to frame my life as a hobby than to confront their fear that I was heading for a fall they couldn't save me from. We created a story about you, she wrote, and we told it so many times that we started to believe it. We praised Alex because his life made sense to us. It was a path we understood. Your world of code and apps was like a foreign language, and instead of trying to learn it, we dismissed it. That is our failure, not yours. It was born of fear, but it became a habit of cruelty. I see that now. The most painful part to read was when she wrote about the reunion. When Rick made that awful joke, I saw a flash of the little girl you used to be, the one I felt I needed to protect. But instead of protecting you, I joined in. It was a terrible, weak moment, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. In that 1 second, I threw my own daughter under the bus to feel like I was part of the crowd. I was so busy managing everyone else's perception of our family that I completely failed to be a mother to you. I broke your trust, and I understand if it can never be repaired. The letter ended with a simple plea. I am not asking for your forgiveness because I haven't earned it, and I am not asking for a new lease. We will figure out what to do about the house. I am asking for a chance someday to show you that I can learn, to show you that I see you, the real you, and I am so, so proud of you. Love, Mom. I folded the letter, tears blurring my vision. It was everything I had needed to hear for 20 years. It was a genuine, painful, and complete apology. It wasn't a magic wand that could erase the past, but it was a bridge. That evening my father called. His voice was humbled, stripped of all artifice. Zoe, did you get your mother's letter? I did, Dad, I said quietly. She meant every word, he said. We've done a lot of talking this week, about everything. We were so wrong, so blind, I'm ashamed of myself. He paused, and I could hear him take a breath. We've started looking for apartments. We can get a small 2-bedroom across town. It'll be tight, but we'll manage. We don't want you to feel obligated. Dad, I interrupted gently. Stop, let's meet for coffee, the three of us, tomorrow morning. When I saw them at the coffee shop, the change was profound. They didn't try to hug me or force a reconciliation. They just sat, their expressions open and vulnerable. We talked for over an hour, and for the first time, it was a real conversation. They asked me about my work, and this time, they listened. They asked about the stress of the buyout, the challenges of running a company, the details of my life. They were trying to learn the language they had ignored for so long. Finally, we came to the subject of the house. I'm not going to kick you out, I said, looking at both of them. But things do need to change. The old arrangement was based on a secret, and I don't want any more secrets between us. I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a draft of a new 1-year lease. The rent is $2,000, I said. It was still significantly below market rate, but it was a $400 increase. It's not a punishment, it's a step toward reality. It's a fair price that reflects that our relationship has to be more honest now. This isn't a secret handout anymore. This is a family arrangement, and it has to be clear-eyed and respectful on both sides. My father looked at the paper and nodded slowly. My mother looked at me, her eyes wet with tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude. That's more than fair, Zoe, she said. Thank you. The future of our family is still a work in progress. The wounds are deep, and they will take a long time to heal completely. My relationship with my Uncle Rick is non-existent, and I imagine many family gatherings will be awkward for years to come. But the core unit, me and my parents, is being rebuilt from the ground up on a new foundation of truth and respect. The old dynamic is shattered for good. I am no longer the daughter they pity. I am the daughter they are proud of, the woman who was strong enough to both save them and force them to face the truth. For the first time in my life, I feel seen. And for the first time in my life, I am in control of my own story. To anyone out there who feels invisible in their own family, who feels like their successes don't count because they don't fit a certain mold, your worth is not determined by their approval. Build your own life. Define your own success. And when the time is right, don't be afraid to pull back the curtain and show them who you really are. You might be surprised by how quickly the story changes.